Come on another radically Colorado adventure with us as we continue to explore Highland, Denver history. Today we're exploring the Tilden Health School and the Packard Hill Historic District. There's a lot to unpack, no pun intended. Before we get going, I have to mention, if you're thinking about buying, selling, or investing in Colorado, we're your go-to resource. I own a real estate brokerage, Symbio, and we would love to help. Denver in the late 19th century is expanding and growing rapidly. With an expanding city comes noise, pollution, dirt, crime, violence, and the first attempt at an American suburb is made due to the invent of streetcars, which have been present in Denver really since the beginning. First pulled by horses, then powered by electricity, the streetcar made the areas surrounding the core of Denver more accessible. People look to the high hills behind Denver and across the South Platte River, and they think that is a spot where we could live. With the streetcar going from 16th Street to 32nd Avenue, across on 29th, down on 26th, all of a sudden, West Denver becomes accessible to people. As transportation improves, oftentimes cities spread out. And that is exactly what we're exploring in this multi-part history on Denver Highlands. We're looking at West Denver Highland today and a couple historic districts within it, the Tilden Historic District and the Packard Hill Historic District, and we're also looking at the library. And all of this is formed in the context of what is deemed in the late 19th century streetcar suburbs. America's really first attempt at suburbs that came because of streetcars. Of course, so many other suburbs follow when we get the automobile, but this is Americana trying something for the first time. Suburbia. Beautiful spring day here in the Highland neighborhood in Denver. Today, in the second part of this history series, we're walking to one of the most fascinating historic districts, the smallest historic district in the Denver Highland neighborhood, the Tilden Historic District, which originally was kind of the OG holistic school in the United States of America. We're going to get slightly philosophical here. The streetcar suburbs that were so popular in the 19th century stood in opposition to the urban areas like Denver, Chicago, New York, etc. That was the whole reason for these streetcar suburbs. It's a movement that has come and resurfaced time and time again in the United States of America. With Prohibition following, the Great White Flight right after that, all of these are really suburban and rural movements that are a part of the tug-of-war game between urban and the idyllic agrarian American lifestyle. A tug-of-war that, in my opinion, without getting political, still happens today between the Democratic and the Republican Party. So you have to think, the 1890s is really a part of this pattern. And Colorado is so iconic as something that stands in opposition to urban American life in the late 1800s. And why I'm saying that is because people would often come to Colorado when they were just, fed up with the world, or they were experiencing illness, and Colorado was thought as this favorable place to heal, really. So within that philosophical backdrop, That's how I want to think about the Tilden Historic District, which really is one of America's first holistic healing institutes that is devoid of these, grosser practices of Western medicine and take a more holistic approach to healing. So yes, Colorado has believed in plant-based healing for a little while here. One thing that I was reflecting on is what is the philosophical foundation of these new streetcar suburbs and all of the, say, utopic movements that followed it. And that is they're standing in stark contrast to what is considered a dystopia, this land of original sin that we live in, to put it in a Christian narrative, because that's very much the narrative of the United States at the time. And what defines a city then? A city is dystopia, full of hustle and bustle, gambling, intoxications, debauchery, adultery, all of these things. So when we think of a utopia, we think of a place that is, bound by morality, but not something where you have to enforce morality, but because we live in an imperfect world, well, all of a sudden we have to enforce morality. So you see at the beginning of the Highland town an ethic that is encoded in the law, meaning they made it illegal to gamble. They put in the law things that they didn't want to follow over to the Highland neighborhood to form this perfect utopic society, in contrast to, Denver, right over there. So that way you could get away and you could raise your family in a nice place, so to speak. In the name of a utopia, which stands in contrast to this Western idea of progress, which includes Western medicine, I'm standing by the Tilden Historic District, which really was one of America's first holistic schools, hospitals, and retreat centers. It's no longer a retreat center. The registration building that you see right behind me is someone's house. They did a great job preserving it. And all three buildings that were the apartments, the classrooms, etc., of this school, institute, and healing center are now transformed into residences. The home we're looking at here, the Bosler Yankee House, stood before the Tilden Institute bought these grounds. Bosler was an ice guy. Yeah, you heard that right. Ice used to be a big industry before refrigeration because you had to have ice to keep things cool. And guess what? The Rocky Mountains had a lot of ice. So, Ambrose Bosler, an ice magnate, had this home designed by John G. Weller, an architect in Denver. It is a Victorian Italianate style, and it's truly one of the most unique homes. Later, Bosler sold it to William Henry Yankee, a guy from Sedalia, Missouri, the state that I'm from, who made his money in mining. This home later passed to Tilden, who bought this and the whole grounds and designed it into a campus. Big shout out to Steve and Jan Davis, who bought this house in 2016 and restored it. It was in almost disrepair, and they put so much effort into making this place absolutely perfect. I want nothing more than to get a tour of this house someday. So, Steve, Jan, any of their friends that watch this, please DM me, reach out. I'd love to see this house so much. 3249 Fairview Place, which is this next building that we're going to go by here, is the main building on the campus. This whole campus, with the exception of the Bosler Yankee home, was designed by renowned architect Harry W.J. Edbrook, who was an American architect who both developed stuff in Illinois and Iowa, so a Midwest guy like me moved here and put up iconic buildings like the Bluebird Theater, First National Bank Building, Denver Gas and Electric Building, the Ogden Theater, so many good things. He also did the Fifth Church of Christ Scientist, the building that we did in part 1. This was the central part of the campus. It was called the main building. It was red brick Craftsman style influence structure that was constructed in 2 stages. The eastern U-shaped part of the building was built in 1919, with the L-shaped addition in 1921. The original building had as many as 100 separate patient rooms, a lecture hall where they offered free lectures every single week, dining hall, sunrooms, and other support spaces. And part of Tilden's philosophy was really that we could be healed through our surroundings. So you can really see that as a reflection in the architecture of this building that was built not only to be lived in, but built to heal. Back when this was the Tilden Health Institute, there used to be gardens, there used to be these winding paths. It used to be a beautiful campus. It still is beautiful, but I'm sure it's lost some of its grandeur that was there when Tilden started the school. So a little bit about Dr. John Henry Tilden, who founded this school. Tilden believed that toxemia and the buildup of toxins and waste in the body was the universal cause of all diseases. He believed that if you ate really well, you had a prudent lifestyle, you had proper hygiene, that you could cure most illnesses. So you see this place advertised as a place that has cured thousands of people from the craziest of all diseases. He also believed that you needed fresh air, you needed sunshine, you had to have restrictions and rules on liquid intake, that you had to clean your colon out, that you rest and the elimination of stress, both mental and physical, all played a part in getting better. Tilden eventually founded this school, and he ran it until 1924 when he sold it for $150,000 to one of his students, Arthur Voss and Andrew Juergens. Yes, Juergens from Juergens Soap. And Frank C. Adams for a whopping $150,000. Smart guy, though, got out before the Depression. This place never made any money and was sold at auction eventually. Tilden also got into plenty of legal disputes with the new owners and was banned for some time for using their contact list to spread bad information about the school, and he kept on doing his own thing outside of the school. This building that we just walked around now was the Patients Apartment Building. It was the first of the 5 buildings to be designed. It was constructed in 1916 by Edbrook as well. The Patients Apartment Building featured fully furnished apartments where patients could reside while learning Tilden's techniques to restore their health. It was designed in the classical revival style and incorporated elements more commonly found in residential construction than medical facilities. The 3-story brick building has a hip roof and a central circular 2-story patio. After the school was shut down, they became the Highland Park Apartments. Here's some old ads where you could rent one for a really cheap price. The building next to it was the clinical building, the last building to be added in 1923. It actually never housed patients. It did house Voss and his family while he ran it before it was sold at auction. That building later became the adult blind home between the 40s and 80s. Here's a cute picture of them going to Elitch's, which used to be right down the road and will be our next video, so tune in for that. So these buildings were transformed into apartments, an adult home for the blind, and a nursing home was the main building. Later, these buildings were transformed into residences. I think they did a really good job on these condo projects, and there are a few on market. Here is some of them. The one on the market, probably one of the most architecturally stunning units in the building because of the curved balcony. This, I'm guessing, used to not be a condo, but the dining area or the lecture hall. To me, the 1890s and late 1800s is a huge turning point for the United States of America. We're not experiencing extreme conflict like we did before with the Civil War, with the Spanish-American War, etc. I mean, we go through the late 1700s and the early 1800s in really a spirit of war. So I think what we see often is these idyllic neighborhoods, these utopic neighborhoods popping up when America's in a time of peace, because that's when we can, to reference Maslow's hierarchy, that's when we can think about self-fulfillment and higher things. We can actualize those things. We can become actually idyllic in our philosophy. In other words, we need to have peace and not be just focused on survival, to think of these higher ideals, to focus on what is the meaning of life and what do we want out of it. And out of that external peace generally comes internal change. And as we walk into the Packard Historic District, it is that internal change that is at the center of America right now. On one side, we have extreme wealth disparity in the Gilded Age of the United States. It's kind of like now, where the rich have just gotten richer, and that gap between the lower and the upper class grows wider and wider, and the percentage of wealth that's in the top 0.1% grows larger and larger. So there are cons to these periods, but there's also pros. And pros generally that come out of these periods, more freedom, more liberty. I know a lot of people will argue with me about that today, but what comes out of the 1890s is the women's suffrage movement. And this historic district is right at the center of it. Following the central theme of this multi-part historic documentary on the Highlands, both the West Highland and the Lower Highland here in Denver, we're following the theme that Streetcar Suburbs were an image of what 1880s and 90s America considered a utopia. Walking into this historic district, which is right off where the streetcar stop was at Lowell and 32nd here, we're following an ethic, really. An ethic that has continued in America today, which is a stark contrast to urbanization in cities and industrialization at this time. Packard Hill Historic District comprises several original places in Highlands. I love to look at these old maps. Here's what it was supposed to be like, and Highlands never took this shape, as you can see. There was all sorts of roads like Inverness roads to keep it themed like the Scottish Highlands. Here's a little bit later map. We're looking at 1905. 32nd isn't complete here. You can see some of those big commercial buildings aren't up there. Here is the streetcar route coming over to 32nd, and you start to see what these historic districts are named after. Generally the landowners. Packard Hill here is a small 1 block by 2 block section of this area, and Highland Place also includes this historic district. So you can see some of these lots are starting to sell. Edison Elementary, which is up here by where these big parcels are, which I'm guessing with some rather wealthy people, is not there yet. So it's going to go where those, bigger parcels are. And as we go down here, we can see Wolf, who owns a good section of this. Now we jump into 1933. A lot more of this is developed. I did see that Edison was actually down below 30th at a certain point, and then it moved up to 33rd where it is now, where we can see it on the map. But the infrastructure is definitely more in place. 32nd starting to take shape. The commercial buildings are there. Here's 3520 Newton Street, which is in the second Highland filing. It has quite the history. It's known as the Walker House, and an 1886 map notes this as John Brisbane Walker's house, who, yes, is the same Walker that has the Walker Ranch Trails close to Morrison with the big burnt down mansion. Same Walker. Lived in this area, but the home was deeded to his brother, Bolivar K. Walker, on 1881. So a little unclear which Walker lived in this house, but we do know that it belonged to their family. Denver city directories from 81 to 88 list John Brisbane Walker residing at Berkeley Farm, which is another place at 38th and Winona Street. So the Walker family graced the second Highland filing with its presence, no matter what Walker it was. This home was built in 1885 from Castle Rock lavastone and stands as a testament to this area and time period. Packard's Hill Historic District was platted in 1887 by William C. Packard and Charles L. Hoffman. There is a high percentage of architecturally significant homes in this area of the Edwardian style, Queen Anne style, bungalows, and American Foursquare. Here we walk by Edison Elementary School. Edison School was founded in 1890, but in a different building, like I was mentioning, below 30th. Here is a historic photo of what that building used to look like. The building that we're looking at here was built in 1925. With the expanding population came a need for a bigger school. After all, the original building of the Edison School, which was on Quitman Street between 30th and 32nd, was a two-story brick building and stone building consisting of only 4 rooms and a basement. Its 2 bathrooms were outside. Yeah, they were outhouses. And because this area, as a streetcar suburb, was rapidly expanding, they decided to build a new school in 1924, and it was already completed by 1925. So pretty fast-moving construction back then. It consisted of 20 rooms originally, a gymnasium, auditorium, lunchroom, kindergarten, office, clinic, and a library. There was 4 lavatories, and they were inside. One last thing on this historic district, not just the architecture and the neighborhood planning was significant. This neighborhood was significant because of its strong association with Denver women's history. And at this time, it reflects the growing influence of women in society, in several professions, and in property ownership and architecture. Actually, from this area's earliest period of development, women were investors and developers, buying and trading parcels of land in Packard's Hill and participating in the construction and sale of houses. It should be noted that women's suffrage in Colorado happened in the late 19th century. It doesn't come until much later in the United States. In, I believe, 1919 was when that happened, and it was in the 1890s that women actually got the right to vote in Colorado. So Colorado was rather progressive in that sense. And in that spirit, Packard's Hill had a bunch of famous people here. Ethel Luke Keplinger was an active artist who helped establish the Denver first art museum. Spring Byington was a super famous actress. She was like in Shirley Temple and a bunch of other stuff. She went to North High School while she was born in Colorado Springs. She had relatives in this area and lived here for a while. Dr. Mary E. Ford provided more than a half century of medical service to Denver. And Eva Bird Bosworth worked as a writer and reporter for several Denver newspapers. Really cool to see this history in Packard's Hill. Back to Highland Park, where we're going to go to the Woodbury Public Library here. It's one of the libraries that Andrew Carnegie funded, and Roger Woodbury, who was a general in the Union Army, had a lot to do with this. He convinced him to give money to Denver, and Woodbury was a pioneer of Denver, working as president of the Denver Tribune. He had his own publication for some time. He was president of one of Denver's banks until the Panic of 1893 and was just a huge influencer here in Denver. This is an absolutely beautiful building. You know, just J.B. Benedict didn't build anything that wasn't beautiful, and this was the Florentine type of architecture, and it's just a beautiful mark on this neighborhood, and was the fourth of 8 Carnegie branches here in Denver. We hope you enjoyed this second part of our series on Highland history. Make sure to follow. We've got more coming.